In the far north of Minnesota, where the roads grow thin and the trees grow thick, there's a stretch of land that barely sees another human all winter long. Snow falls heavy there, muffling sound, blurring edges, turning the world into something soft and still. It's the kind of place people leave behind, not the kind they seek out, unless they're running from something, or trying to find something they lost long ago. That's where Elric Voss lived. He hadn't always been a hermit. Once, decades back, he'd worn suits, carried briefcases, and sat in fluorescent-lit offices where the biggest decisions involved spreadsheets and coffee breaks. But life had a way of chipping away at a person, especially when grief came knocking. After his younger brother died in a car crash, a wreck that happened while Elric was arguing with him over the phone, he couldn't stand the noise of cities anymore. The honking, the chatter, the constant hum of people pretending everything was fine. It all felt like a lie. So he sold what he could, packed what mattered, and drove north until the pavement ended and the pines swallowed the road whole. His cabin wasn't fancy. He'd built most of it himself, log by log, with help from a few neighbors who lived miles away. The roof leaked a little in spring. The stove smoked if the wind blew wrong, and the outhouse was exactly as cold as you'd expect in January. But it was his. And for the first time in years, he slept through the night. Elric kept to a routine. Up at dawn, feed the wood stove, check on Wren, the scruffy border collie he'd adopted from a shelter in Duluth, and then walk the property line. He didn't own much land, just enough to feel private, but it was wild and untamed, full of deer trails, hidden streams, and the occasional bear track. He never hunted, not really. He'd set a few old-fashioned snares years ago, more out of habit than hunger, but mostly he lived off canned goods, dried beans, and whatever berries he could gather in summer. The trap lines were more like a ritual now, something to do with his hands while his mind wandered. Wren was his shadow. She'd trot ahead on walks, nose to the ground, ears perked at every rustle. She didn't bark much, but when she did, Elric listened. She'd once alerted him to a moose wandering too close to the woodpile, and another time to a broken branch that turned out to be a snapped power line after a storm. Animals knew things people forgot. About 10 years ago, during one of his spring cleanups, Elric noticed something odd near the eastern edge of his land. He'd been clearing deadfall, branches and brush that winter storms had dumped in a messy heap, when his boot hit something solid beneath the leaf litter. He knelt, brushed away moss and damp soil, and found a lump. Not a rock, not a root knot. It was too round, too smooth, like someone had buried a basketball and let the forest grow over it. He poked it with a stick. It didn't move. He kicked it lightly. It gave no sound, no echo. Curious, he grabbed a shovel from his shed and dug around the edges. But after a few inches, the thing seemed to sink deeper, fused to the earth somehow. The soil around it was packed tight, almost compacted by time. He couldn't tell what it was made of, stone? Metal, but it felt cold even in May sun, and there was something unsettling about its shape. Nature didn't make things that symmetrical. For a few days he thought about it. Maybe it was an old survey marker. Maybe a piece of farm equipment left behind by the homesteaders who'd tried and failed to tame this land a century ago. He even wondered, half-jokingly, if it was one of those glacial erratics, boulders dropped by ice sheets thousands of years back. But those were usually jagged, not smooth. Still, he didn't dig further. Part of him didn't want to disturb whatever it was. Another part was just tired. He'd learned over the years that not every mystery needed solving. Some things were better left alone. So he covered it back up with leaves, marked the spot in his mind, and went back to splitting wood. Seasons passed. Wren grew older, her muzzle turning gray, her steps slower on icy mornings. Elric's beard got longer, his hands rougher. The lump became part of the landscape, something he walked past without thinking, like the crooked birch or the flat rock by the creek. He'd glance at it sometimes, especially in fall when the leaves thinned and the ground looked bare. But it never changed. Never moved, never called to him until the storm. It came in late July, unusual for that time of year. Dark clouds rolled in fast, boiling over the treetops like smoke. The wind picked up, howling through the pines, snapping branches like twigs. Rain came sideways, stinging Elric's face as he rushed to secure the chicken coop. He kept 3 hens for eggs, and tied down the tarp over his firewood. Thunder cracked so loud it shook the cabin walls. Wren hid under the bed, trembling. The storm lasted most of the night. By morning, the air was clean and sharp, the kind of quiet that follows chaos. Elric stepped outside, boots crunching on broken twigs, and surveyed the damage. A few shingles were gone from the roof. The garden fence was down, and near the eastern tree line, where the lump had been, a massive spruce had toppled over, roots ripped from the earth like clenched fists. He sighed. That tree had stood for over 100 years. Now it lay on its side, a giant brought low by wind and water. He'd have to cut it up for firewood come winter, but as he walked closer, something caught his eye. The fall of the spruce had torn a long gash in the ground, and right beside it, half exposed by the upheaval, was the lump. Only now it wasn't just a lump. Sunlight glinted off something metallic beneath the torn earth. Not rusted iron, but something smoother, shinier like steel that had been carefully preserved. The moss was gone, scraped away by the roots, and the shape, it wasn't round anymore. It had edges, corners. It looked like a box. Elric's heart thumped once hard. He hadn't thought about this thing in years. Hadn't dreamed about it, hadn't worried. But seeing it now, revealed by the storm's violence, felt like the land was showing him something it had kept hidden on purpose. He went back to the cabin, fetched his shovel, gloves, and a coil of rope. Wren followed, tail low, ears alert. She didn't like the smell of disturbed earth, or maybe she sensed his tension. He started digging carefully, not wanting to damage whatever was inside. The soil was loose from the storm, easier to move. Within minutes, he uncovered more of the object. A rectangular metal case about the size of a large shoebox, wrapped in thick, oil-stained cloth. The cloth was brittle, cracking at the edges, but still held together by rusted wire coiled tightly around it. He knelt, brushing dirt from the surface. His fingers trembled slightly, not from cold, but from the weight of the moment. This wasn't natural. Someone had put this here, buried it deep, hidden it well. He cut the wire with his pocket knife. The cloth peeled away like old skin, revealing a steel case with a simple latch. No lock, just a clasp, stiff with age but not broken. He hesitated. Part of him wanted to walk away. Bury it again. Pretend he never saw it. But another part, the part that still remembered his brother's voice on the phone, the part that knew silence could be a kind of betrayal, knew he couldn't. He opened the case. Inside, nestled in crumbling foam padding, were three things: a small leather-bound journal, a bundle of papers sealed in a clear plastic sleeve, and a revolver. The gun was clean, oiled, loaded. Elric's breath stopped. He didn't touch the weapon. Instead, he reached for the journal. The leather was dry but intact. He flipped it open to the first page. The handwriting was neat, hurried, but clear. The ink had faded slightly, but the words were legible. If you're reading this, I didn't make it out. Below that, a name. Cale Renner. And then, in smaller letters, they're still out there. Don't trust anyone. Burn this if you're scared. But if you're not, tell the truth. Elric sat back on his heels, the journal in his lap. The forest suddenly too quiet around him. Wren whined softly, pressing her nose into his knee. He looked at the gun. At the papers. At the name he'd never heard before. 10 years. He'd walked past this spot hundreds of times, never once imagining what lay beneath now. The past had clawed its way to the surface, and it was asking him to do something. He closed the case gently, stood up, and walked back to the cabin, journal in hand. Mind racing. He didn't know who Cale Renner was, didn't know what they wanted. But one thing was certain. This wasn't just a buried secret. It was a message, and it had waited 10 years for someone to find it. Elric made coffee, strong and black, and sat at his rough-hewn table. Wren lay at his feet, watching him with old, knowing eyes. Outside, the sun climbed higher, warming the wet earth. Birds began to sing again, as if the storm had never happened, but everything had changed. He opened the journal again and started reading from the beginning. The words spilled out like a confession, a warning, a plea. Cale hadn't been a criminal. He'd been a contractor, someone who worked with government agencies tracking illegal weapons moving across the northern border. He'd stumbled onto something big, too big, people in uniforms, people with badges, people who smiled at town meetings but dealt in blood and steel when no one was looking. He'd tried to run, tried to hide, tried to get the evidence to someone who'd listen, but the wilderness was vast, and help was far away. His last entry was dated October 12th, 10 years ago, almost to the day Elric first noticed the lump. The handwriting was shaky, the ink smudged as if written with a trembling hand. Legs bad. Can't walk far. Left the case under the spruce. If I don't come back, someone will find it. Maybe not today, maybe not this year, but someday, and when they do, I hope they're brave enough to do what I couldn't. Elric stared out the window at the fallen tree, at the hole in the earth, at the quiet woods that had held this secret for a decade. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't even sure he was a good man, but he knew right from wrong. And this felt like wrong trying to hide. He picked up his satellite phone, the one he kept for emergencies, charged but rarely used, and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. Not 911, not yet. First he needed to know who to trust, but deep down he already knew one thing. He couldn't unsee what he'd found. And he couldn't walk away. Not this time. The morning after the storm, the air smelled like wet pine and turned earth. Elric sat at his kitchen table, the journal open in front of him, steam from his coffee curling into the quiet. Wren lay under the table, her breathing slow and steady, but her ears twitched every time he turned a page. Outside, the fallen spruce lay like a giant's ribcage across the forest floor, its roots still clutching clumps of soil as if trying to pull itself back upright. The metal case sat on the counter, closed but no longer hidden. It felt heavier now, not in weight but in meaning. He'd stayed up most of the night reading. Cale Renner's words weren't dramatic or flashy. They were calm, precise, almost clinical, until the end when fear bled through the lines like ink on damp paper. Cale hadn't been a soldier. He'd worked as a logistics analyst for a small federal task force that tracked illegal arms shipments along the U.S.-Canada border. His job was to follow paper trails, shipping manifests, shell companies, bank transfers. But 6 months before he disappeared, he'd noticed something off. Weapons that had been reported destroyed were showing up in raids hundreds of miles away. Not just old rifles, military-grade stuff, things that shouldn't exist outside secure armories. He'd dug deeper, found names, dates, routes, and then one evening, someone had followed him home. That's when he ran. He'd taken only what he could carry. Cash, a change of clothes, the evidence, and his father's old revolver. He'd driven north off-grid, using back roads and forgotten logging trails. His plan was to reach a contact in Duluth, a retired agent he trusted, and hand over everything. But somewhere near Elric's land, his truck broke down. Or maybe it was sabotaged. The journal wasn't clear. All it said was a tire blew. Engine dead, no signal. They're close. The last few pages were short, fragmented, written in pencil, not pen. Maybe ink had run out, or maybe he was too weak to press hard. Shot in the leg. Not bad, but bleeding won't stop. Buried the case under the spruce. Marked it with a stone. If I die here, let the trees keep me, but don't let them keep the truth. Elric closed the journal gently, as if it might break. He looked out the window again. 10 years. All this time, Cale's story had been sleeping under 6 inches of soil and a blanket of moss, waiting for someone to care enough to look. He stood, walked to the counter, and opened the case once more. This time he examined the papers inside. They were photocopies, faded but readable, of shipping invoices, encrypted ledger pages, and a list of vehicle registrations. One name stood out: Linden County Sheriff's Office. Another document showed a warehouse lease in a town Elric had passed through once on his way to buy supplies. It was signed by someone named R. Voss, but that was just a coincidence, he told himself. Still, his stomach tightened. He didn't know what to do. Calling the local sheriff felt wrong, especially after reading that name in Cale's notes. But ignoring it felt worse. He thought about driving into town, mailing the case to a newspaper, or just burning it all and pretending none of this happened. But then he remembered Cale's last line. Don't let them keep the truth. Truth wasn't something you buried. It was something you carried. He made a decision. First, he needed to verify what he had. Not just trust a journal written by a desperate man. So he dug out his old laptop, the one with no internet used only for offline maps and weather reports, and connected it to a solar charger. He'd kept a few archived news databases on an external drive, saved from his surveying days when he needed historical land records. He typed in Cale Renner and missing person and Minnesota. Nothing came up at first. He tried broader terms. Arms trafficking, border, 2015. Still mostly noise. Local crime reports, fishing regulations, a story about a moose wandering into a gas station. Then he remembered Cale mentioned a vehicle. He flipped back to the journal, left the truck near Blackwater Creek. He searched abandoned vehicle Blackwater Creek 2015. One result, a short blurb in a regional paper. Authorities recovered a 2008 Ford Ranger near Blackwater Creek last week. Owner not located, believed to be a hiker who got lost in the woods. No foul play suspected. The article included a grainy photo of the truck, muddy, windows fogged, driver's door ajar, and in the corner barely visible a bumper sticker, "Protect Wild Places." Elric's breath caught. He'd seen that sticker before, on a truck parked near the trailhead 10 years ago. He'd thought nothing of it at the time, just another city person trying to find themselves in the wilderness. But now he knew. Cale hadn't been lost. He'd been hunted, and the people who'd covered it up had done a good job. Too good. Elric spent the rest of the day reinforcing his cabin. He checked the locks, simple wooden bolts really, and stacked firewood near the door in case he needed a quick barrier. He filled his water jugs, charged his headlamp, and made sure his satellite phone had full battery. He didn't expect trouble, but Cale's words echoed in his mind. They're still out there. That night he barely slept. Every creak of the cabin, every owl hoot made him sit up. Wren stayed close, pressing her warm body against his legs. She knew something was wrong. Dogs always did. By dawn he'd made another decision. He couldn't go to the local authorities, not yet. But he knew someone who might help, a man named Hollis Crane. Hollis had been an FBI agent for 30 years before retiring to a lakeside cabin 2 counties over. Elric had met him once years ago, when Hollis was consulting on a land dispute involving federal survey markers. They'd shared coffee, talked about old maps, and parted with a handshake. Hollis had said, "If you ever need a straight answer from someone who doesn't owe favors, call me." He'd given Elric a number scribbled on a napkin. Elric had kept it in his glove box ever since. Now he dug it out. He packed the case carefully, wrapped it in a tarp, tied it with rope, and loaded it into the bed of his pickup. Wren jumped in beside it, tail thumping once as if she understood they were going somewhere important. The drive was slow. Roads were rough this far north, and rain from the storm had turned some patches to mud. He passed only 2 other vehicles, a mail truck and a logging rig, and neither slowed. The world felt empty, which was usually comforting. Today it felt like being watched. Hollis lived on the edge of Lake Vermilion, in a modest A-frame with a canoe tied to a dock. Smoke curled from the chimney. A German shepherd barked as Elric's truck rumbled up the gravel drive. But Hollis appeared on the porch right away, hand raised in greeting. He was older now, hair white, shoulders slightly stooped, but his eyes were sharp. He took one look at Elric's face and said, "You didn't come for fishing tips." Elric shook his head. "I found something, and I think it's serious." Hollis didn't ask questions right away. He led Elric inside, poured 2 mugs of strong black coffee, and sat at a table covered in nautical charts and old case files. Wren lay by the door watching the shepherd, who'd stopped barking and now sniffed the air curiously. Elric placed the case on the table. "I found this buried near my cabin. Been there 10 years. Belonged to a man named Cale Renner." Hollis went very still. Then slowly he said, "I know that name." Elric's pulse jumped. "You do?" Hollis nodded. "Not personally, but I remember the file. Closed case. Labeled accidental death in wilderness, but there were whispers. Things that didn't add up. I tried to look into it after I retired, but hit a wall. Officially, it was a dead end. Unofficially," he trailed off, opening the case with careful hands. He read the journal first, then the documents. His face grew grimmer with each page. When he finished, he leaned back, rubbing his temples. "This isn't just old news," he said quietly. "Some of these names, they're still active. That warehouse lease? It's now a hunting supply store owned by a guy who used to be a deputy. And the sheriff's office listed here? Their current captain was a junior officer back then." Elric felt cold. "So it's still going on?" "I don't know," Hollis admitted. "But if someone went to the trouble of burying this and making sure Cale disappeared, they wouldn't stop just because one guy got away. They'd keep moving product, keep making money, and they'd protect their own." He looked at Elric. "You did the right thing coming to me. If you'd gone to the local station, this might have vanished before lunch." They talked for hours. Hollis explained how these networks worked. Small, tight-knit, often hiding in plain sight. A hunting lodge might be a front. A fishing charter could move more than trout. And in remote areas, law enforcement was stretched thin. One bad apple could rot the whole barrel. Here's what we do, Hollis said finally. I still have contacts in the bureau, people I trust. I'll reach out quietly. No names, no panic. Just say I've got credible evidence tied to an old cold case. They'll send someone clean. In the meantime, you go home. Act normal. Don't tell anyone. Not your neighbors, not the gas station clerk, no one. Elric nodded, but as he turned to leave, Hollis added, And Elric, keep your rifle loaded. The drive back felt longer. The woods seemed darker, the shadows deeper. Every bend in the road made him check his mirrors. He kept expecting headlights behind him, a truck pulling up too close. But the road stayed empty. When he got home, he buried the case again, not in the same spot but under the floorboards of his shed, wrapped in oilcloth and hidden beneath old tools. Then he sat on his porch, Wren at his side, watching the sun dip behind the pines. He thought about Cale, about how he died alone, scared, hoping someone would find his message. And now, 10 years later, someone had, but finding it was only the beginning. The real danger wasn't in the digging. It was in what came after. That night, as he lay in bed listening to the wind, Elric made one more call. Not to Hollis, not to the FBI. He dialed 911. When the dispatcher answered, calm and professional, he said only this. My name is Elric Voss. I live off County Road 17, near Blackwater Creek. 10 years ago, a man named Cale Renner went missing in these woods. I believe I've found evidence related to his disappearance. I'm reporting it now for the official record. He didn't give details, didn't mention the case or the gun. Just enough to create a timestamp, a paper trail, a witness in the system. Because if something happened to him, if he vanished like Cale, someone would know he'd spoken up. He hung up, set the phone on the nightstand, and closed his eyes. Wren sighed in her sleep. Outside, the forest breathed, and somewhere deep in the dark, the past waited to be answered. The days after Elric's call to 911 moved slowly, like honey dripping from a spoon. Nothing dramatic happened. No black SUVs roaring down the dirt road. No strangers asking questions at the general store. But the silence felt heavier now, charged with something unspoken. Every time a crow cawed or a branch snapped in the wind, Elric's shoulders tensed. He kept his rifle by the door, loaded but not cocked, and made sure Wren stayed close whenever he stepped outside. She seemed to sense the shift too. Her ears stayed perked, her eyes scanning the tree line even when she lay in the sun. He didn't sleep much. When he did, his dreams were full of muddy boots, whispered voices, and a man with a blood-stained shirt writing in a journal by flashlight. He'd wake with his heart pounding, the cabin dark except for the soft glow of embers in the stove. During the day, he tried to keep up his routine, chopping wood, feeding the hens, checking the snares, but his mind kept circling back to Cale's words. They're still out there. Who were they? And how close were they? He thought about the documents again. One name kept tugging at him. The sheriff's office. Not the current sheriff. He was new. A woman who'd moved up from the state patrol, but someone listed as a logistics contact on one of the manifests. The name was abbreviated DC, but the phone number next to it. Elric had seen it before. He dug through his old notebooks, ones he used to log weather patterns and animal sightings, and found it. 2 years ago, a county truck had pulled into his driveway. A man in a uniform had stepped out, introduced himself as Deputy Cade, and asked if Elric had seen any unusual activity in the area. At the time, Elric assumed it was routine, maybe a missing hiker or a stolen snowmobile. The deputy had been polite, even friendly, offering a thermos of coffee and chatting about the harsh winter. But now, remembering the way the man's eyes had lingered on the shed on the tree line on Wren, it didn't feel so innocent. Elric pulled out his satellite phone and dialed Hollis. It's me, he said when the older man answered. I think I know one of them. He explained about Deputy Cade, the visit, the number matching the document. Hollis was quiet for a moment. Then, Cade's still on the force. Not a deputy anymore, he's a captain now. Runs the night shift. Quiet guy, keeps to himself. Never been flagged for anything. That doesn't mean he's clean, Elric said. No, Hollis agreed. It just means he's careful. They talked for a while longer. Hollis said his contact at the bureau was moving slowly, too slowly. They're verifying chains of custody, making sure this doesn't blow up in their faces, he explained. But I pushed. Told them if they wait too long, the trail might go cold again. Elric hung up, feeling both relieved and uneasy. At least someone was listening. But waiting felt like standing on thin ice, hearing it crack beneath your feet. That afternoon, he decided to do something he hadn't done in years. Drive into town. Not for supplies. Not for gossip. But to look. Linden County's main town, just a cluster of buildings really, had a post office, a diner, a hardware store, and a sheriff's office that looked more like a house with bars on the windows than a place of law. Elric parked his truck a block away and walked, hands in his pockets, collar turned up against the wind. Wren stayed in the cab, watching him through the window. He went to the diner first, ordered black coffee and a slice of pie he didn't plan to eat. Sat by the window where he could see the street. The place was quiet. Just a couple of old-timers arguing about fishing season and a young woman refilling ketchup bottles behind the counter. After 20 minutes, he paid and walked toward the sheriff's office. He didn't go inside. Just stood across the street pretending to read a faded community bulletin board. His eyes scanned the parking lot. 3 patrol cars, a pickup with a county decal, and 1 dark sedan with tinted windows. Then he saw him. Captain Cade stepped out of the building, adjusting his belt. He looked older than Elric remembered, hair thinner, face more lined, but the walk was the same. Slow, deliberate, like he owned the ground he walked on. He spoke to another officer, laughed at something, then got into the sedan and drove off. Elric didn't follow. He turned and walked back to his truck, heart thudding. But as he passed the hardware store, something caught his eye in the window. A display of hunting knives. And beside them, a small framed photo of a group of men in camouflage standing in front of a lodge. The sign read, Blackwater Outfitters, serving hunters since 2005. Elric froze. Blackwater. The same name as the creek near his cabin. The same name as the place where Cale's truck was found. He went inside. The store smelled of oil, leather, and sawdust. An old man with thick glasses sat behind the counter. Reading a magazine, just looking, Elric said. The man nodded, barely glancing up. Elric wandered the aisles, pretending to examine rope and lanterns, but his eyes kept drifting to a brochure on the counter. He picked it up casually. Blackwater Outfitters. Guided hunts, cabin rentals, gear sales. The address was listed as a rural route number. 10 miles from his cabin. He flipped through the pages. Photos of smiling hunters with deer, maps of trails, a list of trusted partners. And there, near the back, Security and Logistics Coordination by Northern Shield Services. Northern Shield. That name wasn't in Cale's journal, but it sounded familiar. Back in his truck, he pulled out his offline archive drive and searched. Nothing under Northern Shield. But when he tried Northern Shield plus arms, a single result appeared. A footnote in a 2014 Senate subcommittee report on border security. It listed Northern Shield as a defunct private contractor that had lost its federal license after irregularities in inventory reporting. Irregularities. That was government speak for stolen weapons. Elric's hands tightened on the steering wheel. It was all connected. The outfitters, the sheriff's office, the old contractor. Cale had stumbled into a web that stretched from government warehouses to backwoods hunting lodges, and the people running it weren't just criminals. They were trusted figures, the kind who waved at you in town, who helped to dig your truck out of a snowbank, who showed up at church suppers. That's what made it so dangerous. No one would believe it. He drove home slowly, mind racing. He needed proof that couldn't be ignored. Not just old papers and a dead man's journal. Something current. Something undeniable, but how? That night, as he fed Wren and stoked the fire, an idea came to him. Cale had buried the case near the spruce because it was hidden, but accessible. Maybe he'd left other markers, other clues. People in survival situations often left signs, carvings on trees, stacked stones, bent branches, to guide rescuers or mark safe paths. Elric grabbed a flashlight and walked back to the dig site. The fallen spruce still lay where it fell, its roots exposed like broken fingers. He circled it slowly, beam sweeping the ground. Moss, leaves, broken twigs. Nothing unusual. Then he noticed something. About 20 feet east, a birch tree had a strip of bark missing, not torn by an animal, but cut cleanly in a straight line. And below it, 3 small stones stacked in a pyramid. His breath caught, he knelt, brushed away leaves. At the base of the stones, half buried, was a rusted metal tin, the kind used for film or tobacco. He pried it open with his knife. Inside was a micro SD card sealed in a plastic bag and a note. If the case is gone, this is your next step. Use a clean device. Don't plug it in twice. Elric's hands shook. Cale had planned for this. He'd known someone might find the case, but he'd also known they might need more. Back at the cabin, he booted up his offline laptop again. He'd never connected it to the internet, not even once. It was truly clean. He inserted the SD card. A single folder appeared. Inside, audio files, scanned photos, and a spreadsheet titled Final Proof. He clicked the first audio file. A man's voice, Cale's, spoke, low and urgent. This is Cale Renner, recording on October 8, 2015. I'm hiding near Blackwater Creek. I just witnessed a weapons transfer at the outfitter's warehouse. 2 men in sheriff's uniforms. One of them is Captain Decade. They unloaded crates marked camping supplies, but I saw rifles inside. M4s, maybe more. I took photos. If I don't make it, someone needs to see this. Elric played the next file. More details. License plates, times, names, then the photos. Grainy, taken with an old phone, but clear enough. A warehouse door open at night. Men unloading boxes. One face unmistakable. Cade in uniform holding a clipboard. The spreadsheet listed dates, amounts, destinations. One column read, Buyers Domestic. Another, Buyers International via Canada. This wasn't just smuggling. It was a pipeline. Elric sat back stunned. This was enough. More than enough. This could bring down half the county's law enforcement, but it was also a death sentence if the wrong people found out he had it. He copied the files to a second encrypted drive, hid the original SD card in a hollowed-out log near the woodpile, and wiped the laptop clean. Then he called Hollis again. I've got more, he said. Real proof, photos, audio, names. Hollis listened in silence. When Elric finished, he said, Don't move. Don't show it to anyone. I'm coming to you. But Elric, Hollis interrupted, voice firm. You're holding a live wire. And someone's going to notice it's missing. They agreed Hollis would come at dawn alone in his personal truck. No logos, no plates that could be traced. He'd take the drive and get it to his FBI contact directly. Elric spent the rest of the night awake, rifle across his lap. Wren curled at his feet. The wind picked up again, rattling the windows. He kept thinking about Cale. How he'd recorded those files knowing he might not survive the night. How he'd buried them anyway, trusting that someday, someone would care enough to listen. Now that someone was him, and he wouldn't let that trust die. When the first light touched the treetops, he heard the rumble of an engine in the distance. He peered through the blinds. Hollis's old green pickup turned onto the drive, but as it got closer, Elric's stomach dropped. Behind it, half a mile back, was another vehicle. A dark sedan, the same one he'd seen outside the sheriff's office. He grabbed the drive, shoved it in his coat pocket, and met Hollis at the door. They're following you, Elric whispered. Hollis's face went grim. I know, I saw them on the highway. Thought I'd lost them. They didn't have time. Elric handed him the drive. Take it, go, I'll hold them off if I have to. Hollis hesitated. You shouldn't be here alone. I've been alone for 10 years, Elric said. I know this land better than they do. Hollis nodded, gripped his shoulder once, and got back in his truck. As he drove off, Elric watched the sedan slow at the end of the drive. Then keep going, following Hollis for now. But they'd be back because now they knew someone had found the truth. And truth, once unearthed, doesn't stay buried for long. The moment Hollis's truck disappeared around the bend, Elric felt the weight of the woods press in on him like a held breath. He didn't go back inside right away. He stood on the porch, hands shoved deep in his coat pockets, eyes fixed on the road where the dark sedan had vanished. It hadn't stopped, hadn't turned in, but that didn't mean it wouldn't come back. People like that didn't give up. They waited, Watched. Learned your patterns. Wren came to his side, her nose twitching at the wind. She let out a low whine, soft, almost questioning, as if she knew something had shifted in the air. Yeah, Elric murmured, scratching behind her ears. They're coming. He spent the next hour preparing, not with panic, but with the quiet focus of someone who'd spent years surviving alone. He filled every water jug he owned, stacked canned food near the wood stove, checked his rifle, cleaned the barrel, loaded a fresh magazine, tucked extra rounds in his coat. He didn't plan to use it, but if they came onto his land uninvited, he wanted them to know he wasn't an easy mark. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He walked the full perimeter of his property, not just the usual trails, but the old game paths, the creek beds, the places only animals and desperate men used. He checked for tire tracks, broken branches, anything out of place, nothing. Yet. By midday, the sky turned gray again. A cold front was moving in. He built up the fire, boiled a pot of beans, and sat at the table with Cale's journal open in front of him. Not reading, just holding it. The leather was worn smooth at the edges, the pages soft from time and handling. He imagined Cale writing those words in the dark, leg bleeding, heart pounding, hoping against hope that someone would find this, someone who wouldn't look away. Elric hadn't asked for this. He just wanted peace. Quiet. A place to grieve without the world pressing in. But sometimes peace wasn't the absence of noise, it was the presence of truth. And truth had a way of finding you, even in the deepest woods. Around 3 in the afternoon, his satellite phone buzzed. It was Hollis. "They've got it," he said, voice tight but steady. "My contact passed it up the chain. FBI field team is assembling. They're treating this as active, possible ongoing criminal enterprise with law enforcement involvement. They're moving quietly, but they're moving." Elric exhaled. "How long?" "Hard to say. Could be days. Could be hours. They're pulling records now. Vehicle logs, financial trails, everything tied to those names. But Elric, they know someone found the case." The SD card wasn't the only copy Cale made. "What do you mean?" "According to the files, he sent an encrypted backup to a secure drop, a dead man's switch. If he didn't check in every 72 hours, it would auto-send to 3 separate inboxes. One of them was flagged by a foreign intelligence unit. They've been sitting on it, waiting to see who'd claim it." Elric went cold. "So they know it's out there. They know someone has it. And they're guessing it's local. That's why they're watching the roads, the towns, the cabins. They can't risk a leak." Elric looked out the window. The wind had picked up, shaking the pines. "They'll come here." "Probably," Hollis admitted. "But not yet. They'll wait for dark, or for you to slip up. Don't give them a reason." They hung up. Elric spent the rest of the day reinforcing what he could. He dragged his heaviest log across the front door, just enough to slow someone down, not enough to look suspicious. He moved the case from under the shed floor to a false bottom in his old ice chest, buried beneath frozen venison. Then he sat on the porch again, Wren beside him, and watched the light fade. Night fell fast in the north. By 8, the only sounds were the crackle of the fire inside and the occasional hoot of an owl. Elric ate a cold supper, beans and hard bread, and kept his rifle within arm's reach. He didn't turn on the lantern, let the dark hide him. Around 10, headlights appeared on the distant road. His pulse jumped, but the vehicle didn't slow. It passed without stopping, tires crunching on gravel, then vanished into the trees. A patrol? A scout? He couldn't tell. He stayed awake until 2 in the morning, listening, watching. Nothing else moved. At dawn, exhausted but wired, he brewed strong coffee and stepped outside. Frost coated the ground. The air was sharp and clean. For a moment, it felt like any other morning. Then he saw it, fresh tire tracks on the edge of his drive, where the road met the tree line. Not from his truck. Narrower, smoother tread. They'd been here. Not close enough to enter, but close enough to watch. He followed the tracks a short way. They looped back toward the main road, then disappeared. Professional, quiet, patient. That's when he knew he couldn't wait. If he stayed, they'd corner him, isolate him. Maybe make it look like an accident. A cabin fire, a fall, a bear attack. Out here, no one would question it. He needed to force their hand, but not with violence. With truth. He remembered something Cale had written. The system only works if people use it. So Elric did the one thing they wouldn't expect. He called 911 again. This time, he didn't whisper. He spoke clearly, calmly, into the dispatcher's ear. "My name is Elric Voss. I live off County Road 17. Over the past 48 hours, I've observed suspicious activity near my property. Unmarked vehicles, individuals watching my cabin at night. I believe it's connected to the disappearance of Cale Renner 10 years ago. I have reason to believe local law enforcement may be involved. I am requesting an independent investigation by state or federal authorities." He gave his coordinates, described the vehicles, mentioned Captain Cade by name, then he hung up. It was a gamble. If the dispatcher was clean, help might come. If not, he'd just painted a target on his own back, but he'd made his choice. He spent the morning packing a go bag, extra clothes, dried food, his passport, the journal, and a small photo of his brother. Just in case he had to run. Wren watched him, tail low, sensing the urgency. By noon, a county patrol car turned onto his drive. Elric's stomach dropped. It wasn't Cade. It was a younger deputy. Someone he'd seen once at the post office. The man stepped out slowly, hand resting near his belt but not on his gun. "Mr. Voss?" he called. Elric stood on the porch, rifle not in hand but visible beside the door. "That's me. I got a call about a welfare check. Said you reported suspicious activity." Elric nodded. "I did, and I stand by it." The deputy shifted. "Look, sir, I don't know what you think you saw, but Captain Cade's a good man. He's been with the department 20 years. "Then he won't mind an outside review," Elric said evenly. The deputy hesitated. Then quietly, "You're making things hard for yourself." "I'm making things honest," Elric replied. The deputy studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded, almost to himself, and got back in his car. As he drove off, Elric noticed something. The man didn't report back over the radio. Didn't call it in. Just left. That told him everything. They were closing ranks. But later that afternoon, something unexpected happened. A state police cruiser pulled up, marked, official, with a trooper in full uniform. She introduced herself as Officer Lynn, from the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. She said they'd received Elric's 911 call and were opening a formal inquiry. She didn't ask for the evidence, didn't push, just took notes, asked calm questions, and promised to follow up. Before she left, she looked him in the eye and said, "Stay inside tonight. Keep your dog close, and if anyone shows up who isn't wearing a state badge, don't open the door." Elric believed her. That night he slept for the first time in days. Light, fitful, but real. The next morning before sunrise, Hollis called again. "It's happening," he said. "FBI moved fast. They've got warrants. They're hitting the outfitter's warehouse at dawn. And they've placed Cade on administrative leave, pending investigation." Elric sat up. "Is it over?" "No," Hollis said. "But it's starting." By noon, news began to trickle in, even out here where the internet was spotty. A local radio station reported a major law enforcement operation near Blackwater Creek. No names yet. But photos showed federal agents in tactical gear, boxes being carried out of a building Elric recognized, the hunting lodge from the brochure. Then came the arrests. Not just Cade, 2 other officers. The owner of the outfitters, a man who ran a trucking company that serviced the border crossings, all taken into custody without incident. But the most shocking name? The county sheriff's former logistics coordinator, a quiet man who'd retired 5 years ago but still lived in town. He'd been Cale's last known contact before he vanished. Elric sat at his table listening to the radio, Wren resting her head on his knee. It wasn't justice. Not yet. Trials would take months, maybe years. Some would lie. Some would disappear into plea deals. But the wall had cracked, and light was getting in. That evening, as the sun set in streaks of orange and purple, Elric walked to the spot where he'd found the case. The hole was still there, half filled with rainwater and fallen leaves. He knelt and placed a single smooth stone on the edge, the kind Cale might have used. "I found it," he whispered, and I didn't look away. Wren sat beside him, tail thumping once. Somewhere, far off, a loon called across the lake. And for the first time in 10 years, the forest didn't feel like a hiding place, it felt like a witness. Winter came early that year. By late October, the first real snow had already dusted the pines in white, and the lake near Elric's cabin wore a thin skin of ice along its edges. The air smelled clean and sharp, like frozen bark and distant wood smoke. It was the kind of quiet that settles after a storm, not just the weather but the kind that follows truth finally breaking through. Life hadn't gone back to normal. Not exactly, but it had found a new rhythm. Federal agents had come and gone from his property twice more, once to take formal statements, another time to walk the land with cadaver dogs, searching for any trace of Cale Renner's remains. They found nothing but old campfire ash and a rusted canteen half buried near the creek. Still, they marked the area, took soil samples, and promised to keep looking. Some bodies, one agent told Elric gently, are never found. But that doesn't mean they're forgotten. Elric believed that. He'd kept Cale's journal, not as evidence anymore, but as a reminder. He'd read it again, slowly this time, not for clues, but for the man behind the words, the dry humor in a note about bad coffee, the worry in a line about his sister's birthday coming up, the quiet courage in the final pages. Cale hadn't been a hero in the loud, flashy way people liked in movies. He'd been ordinary, scared, determined, and that made what he'd done all the more real. News of the case spread, but not in the way Elric feared. There were no sensational headlines, no late-night TV exposés. The Bureau kept it quiet, sealed most of the files, and let the legal process move without fanfare. A few local papers ran short pieces, former sheriff's captain among those charged in arms trafficking ring, but even those faded after a week. People had their own lives to live, their own winters to prepare for, but not everyone forgot. One afternoon in early November, as Elric was splitting wood behind the cabin, he heard a vehicle on the road. Not the rumble of a patrol car or the familiar growl of Hollis's truck. This was lighter, slower. He straightened, wiping sweat from his brow, and saw a small blue hatchback pull into his drive. A woman stepped out. Mid-30s, dark hair pulled into a loose braid, wearing a thick coat and boots dusted with snow. She held a paper cup in one hand and looked around with quiet curiosity, like she was trying to match the land to a memory. Wren barked once, then stopped, tail wagging slightly, her way of saying, "This one's okay." Elric set down his axe and walked over. "Can I help you?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral but not unfriendly. The woman turned. Her eyes were the same shade as Cale's in the photo tucked in the back of the journal. Deep brown, steady, a little tired. "My name's Lyra," she said. Cale Renner was my uncle. Elric's breath caught. He hadn't expected this. Hadn't known Cale even had family left. "I'm Elric," he said after a moment. "I found his journal." She nodded as if she already knew. "They told me. The FBI. They said you're the reason they reopened the case." "I just dug it up," he said simply. "He did the hard part." Lyra smiled faintly. "He always was stubborn. Even as a kid, if he saw something wrong, he couldn't just walk past it." She held out the cup. "Brought you coffee. Black, 2 sugars, my guess. I figured you might not get many visitors." Elric took it. The warmth seeped into his hands. "Thank you." They sat on the porch steps, steam rising between them, the snow falling soft and silent around them. Lyra told him about Cale, how he'd grown up in Duluth, loved old maps and terrible puns, worked odd jobs before landing the government contract. How he'd called her the night before he disappeared just to hear her voice. "He said he was taking a long hike," she said, voice cracking slightly. "I thought he meant it literally." Elric didn't offer empty comfort, just listened. Sometimes that was enough. Before she left, she handed him a small envelope. "I found this in his old apartment. It was tucked in a book he loved, Wea Walden. I think he meant for someone like you to have it." Inside was a single sheet of paper, not a note, not a message, just a pressed wildflower. Purple aster, the kind that bloomed along the creek in late summer, and beneath it, in Cale's handwriting, "For the one who listens to the woods." Elric held it for a long time. Lyra came back a few weeks later. And again after that. Sometimes she brought groceries. Sometimes just silence. She'd sit by the lake, leave a few wildflowers near the old dig site, and talk to Elric about nothing important. Weather, books, the stubbornness of her old pickup truck. She never stayed long, but she always came, and slowly, without either of them planning it, the cabin didn't feel so empty. The legal fallout continued in the background. Kate and the others pleaded not guilty, but the evidence was overwhelming. The photos, the audio, the shipping logs. One of the trucking company owners flipped, naming names, describing how weapons were disguised as camping gear and moved through fake hunting tours. A federal judge called it a betrayal of public trust at the deepest level. No one ever found Cale's body. But in December, a small ceremony was held at a veterans memorial in Duluth, not because he'd served in the military, but because he'd served the truth. Lyra read a short passage from his journal. Elric stood at the back, ran at his side, hat in hand. No cameras, no speeches, just a few people who remembered. Back home, life settled into a new kind of quiet. Elric still chopped wood, still fed the hens, still walked the trails with Wren. But now sometimes there was a second set of footprints in the snow. Sometimes smoke rose from the chimney long after dark because someone was staying for dinner. And sometimes when the wind howled through the pines, it didn't sound like loneliness anymore. It sounded like the land breathing, finally at peace. He never sought recognition. Didn't give interviews. When a documentary crew reached out, quiet, respectful, focused on Cale's story, not his own, he agreed, but only under one condition. Tell it like it happened. No drama, no heroes, just a man who buried the truth. And another who dug it up. The film aired months later on a small public broadcasting channel. Most people missed it, but those who watched saw not a thriller, but a human story about duty, about memory, about how silence can be a kind of violence, and speaking up even 10 years late can be a kind of healing. One evening, as Elric sat on the porch watching the northern lights ripple across the sky, green ribbons dancing over the frozen lake, Lyra joined him, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. He'd be glad, she said softly. That someone heard him, Elric nodded. I think he knew someone would. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the crackle of ice on the shore and Wren's soft snores at their feet. The world was still full of secrets. Still full of people who buried things they hoped would never be found. But Elric had learned something important. Some truths don't need to be shouted. They just need to be carried, passed from one pair of hands to another, from one heart to the next, and sometimes that's enough. Winter deepened. Snow piled high against the cabin walls. Inside, the stove glowed. The journal rested on the shelf, and the coffee pot was always ready. Out in the woods, the spot where the lump once lay was now marked by a small stone cairn, built by Lyra, added to by Elric, visited by no one but them. It wasn't a grave. It was a promise that the truth wouldn't be buried again, that someone would always be listening, and that even in the quietest places, courage could grow, slow, steady, and strong, like a pine tree pushing through frozen ground, reaching for the light.